Hello again, this is Ron with Stay Sharp, and in this video we're looking at the Kudupoint, and this happens to be the Contour with the little bleeder blade. And so this is a new one sent to me by a viewer. We are going to look at it under the microscope as we always do, and then we are going to put it in the sharpness tester, and then we're going to try to come up with a sharpening solution for its users. So stay tuned. Now that we've seen the edge under the microscope, I can say it didn't look too bad. There were a few things we have to correct, but I can definitely feel a degree of sharpness here, so I don't think it's going to score too bad. But again, out of the box sharpness, that's a snapshot in time. As soon as you practice with it, you're going to dull it. Shoot an animal into the dirt, you're going to dull it, and you'll own sharpening. But at least let's get a baseline. .430, so that's not bad. That's just outside the new high-end cutlery. Like I said, the edge did look good. I can feel a slight burr on there. So this head is near hunt ready, but as soon as you practice with it, you're going to dull it. Then we're going to pair it up with a sharpening guide and try to see if we can improve upon that factory edge, because again, you'll own that through the life of the head. Every animal you'll take, all you're doing is dulling it, so the head won't be ruined. You just need to return it back to a sharp, huntable edge. So we'll do that next. The last step that we take before sharpening is getting a weight. This, I don't have the bleeder on here, even though this is a 125 grain head. I'm going to weigh it without the bleeder. So we are 118 to begin with. To sharpen this Kudupoint Contour, I'm going to use the version C guide, and this guide has 5 different positions. The highest one would get you to 40 degrees, which will match the angle on this head. Now, if you buy just the guide, you're going to get just this unit. If you buy the kit, you get the double cut Swiss file. This head is not so dull as to need a file. A ceramic crock stick, a wood dowel, and buffing compound. Now the wood dowel can be coated with the buffing compound as the final step, but another use for the wood dowel is if you pick up some of the sandpaper on our web store, you can wrap the dowel with some tape in the grits of sandpaper. Now we offer 240, 400, 800, 1200, and 2500 grit. So if you pick up a pack of that, you can make round files with the wooden dowel, and you can make a round file in 5 different grits. Let's look at this edge. We will color it up with Sharpie marker. This will tell us how close we are to the factory bevel, and it'll tell us when we've got 100% cleanup. So I'm going to start, I've wrapped this stick with 400 grit. You would rest the stick on the roller, which of course rolls, and then you've got the option of starting in the center and working out, center and working back. You can start at the very back and sweep out. But as I'm doing this right now, you can see that I'm doing a pretty good job of getting rid of that marker. So the top setting gets you to 40 degrees. I'm going to go through this with 4, 8, 12, and 2500 grit. When I develop a burr on the back side, and I will, I need to break that burr off. Now that's going to get rid of some of this coating, but you would rather have a sharp edge than the coating anyway, so don't worry about messing up the coating. That's why they make rust inhibitors. You're going to have to put rust inhibitor on this edge to protect it from corrosion, and probably this part of the ferrule as well. So don't worry about removing the coating on this side. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to sharpen it up, and I will check back along the way. At this point, I've gone over the entire edge with the wood dowel with 400 grit on it. If you have one of these jewel sticks, that's also a great option. Again, put it on the roller, stroke out to the tip, start in the middle, stroke out to the trailing edge. So we don't supply that, but if you've got this jewel stick, it's a great knife sharpening tool. It's a great broadhead sharpening tool. So certainly you have the option to employ that, but the round dowel allows you to make your own little jewel sticks in any grit you want. Now, as I do in every video, I talk about the burr on a single bevel. You're going to develop a burr on the back side. You've sharpened this side. The burr will be on that back side. Now, the problem with feeling the burr with paper on a concave edge is you've got to cut the piece of paper very narrow in order to feel the burr. Otherwise, it doesn't follow the contour. So here you can see the paper is hanging up on the edge. Let me reposition it here. I'm getting better light. So that paper pauses as it hits the burr. It catches. That tells you that you have gone to the far side of the edge, and if you can stop the paper with the burr, you know you've done all you need to do with that grit. So you get a burr on one side, and then the task is to break it off. Now you need to have some sort of an elevated platform that gets you up off of the legs of the version C guide. That could be the edge of a countertop. It could be anything that you've got that would elevate you enough. Now in this case, I'm just going to grab a diamond plate to demonstrate, but you would want to tip the head on here flat, and you'll feel it flat, and stroke just to break off that burr. We're going to be removing that coating on the back side, but you care about sharp more than that coating. Tip it flat and give it a stroke. That will be the same, and as you can see, we're starting to remove the coating. That will be the same at every grit. So at every grit you get a burr, every grit you break off the burr, and here I'll just lay a piece of wet dry. That's 12. That's too coarse there. Here we'll do 400. I'll just lay a piece of wet dry on here. Tip it flat and give it a stroke. That's how you go about breaking the burr off on a single bevel. So I'll keep going, then I'll come back. At this point, I'm at 2500 grit wrapped around the dowel, and I find that at these finer grits, I like to do a pulling stroke only. If I try to push into the blade, I risk cutting the sandpaper, and there's no need for that. If the pulling stroke works just fine. So I'm starting in the middle, going toward the tip, starting in the middle, going toward the trailing edge. And as you can see, we're developing a heck of an edge. Now, as I talked about before, breaking the burr, you want to elevate it a bit. Here I've just got the cardboard box that my sharpness tester came in. I'm just going to lay a diamond plate on the edge of it And because I created a burr with 2500 grit, I want to break it off with 2500 grit. So I'm going to lay that on there, right along the edge. I'll hold it in my hand like this and use my thumb to trap it. So I'm going to tip it until I feel it hit flat and then stroke it. So that is the process for breaking off the burr. I'm going to move this here so you can see it a little bit better. That is the process for breaking off the burr at any grit. Lay it flat, and you'll feel that, and stroke it across the sandpaper. That will break off the burr at the grit that I created. So this was a 2500 grit burr. Now I'm using 2500 grit to break off that burr. And as I mentioned earlier, we are getting rid of the Koenig, but as you can see, this is the other side of the edge. A single bevel still has two edges, so the finish we're producing on this side, we want to produce on this side, and I can tell you right now, that edge is getting really, really sharp. So I'm going to go a little bit more on this, then I'm going to go to the ceramic crock stick, and then I'll come back and talk about a buffing compound. Now we're at the point where we're going to use buffing compound. Wipe the buffing compound across the dowel to coat it, and then, just as you've been doing with every other grit, use a pulling motion. If you try to cut into the blade, you will cut the wood dowel and you will scrape off the buffing compound. So there I'm going from the center toward the tip. Here I'm going from the center toward the trailing edge. And do this as long as you'd like, because this really polishes up that edge and really produces an excellent mirror finish on the very cutting edge. So how do you break the burr off after buffing compound? Well, refer back to the last burr that I just broke off. Just use your 2500 grit or the finest grit that you've got. Lay it flat on the 2500 grit and break that burr off. So I've gone through it with every grit of sandpaper. I started with 400. I went 400, 800, 1200, 2500, ceramic crock stick, and now finally the buffing compound. So I'm going to do a little bit more on this, and then we're going to look at it under the microscope and check it for sharpness. That edge looked pretty good under the microscope. It seems very sharp. As I mentioned before, we are getting rid of that coating that's on there, and we've produced a mirror finish on the back side, just like we've produced a mirror finish on the front side. There are two edges of a single bevel. Now the test. .92. That is a very, very sharp edge. That is an edge sharper than a razor blade, and the reason I can say that is because I've tested razor blades in this machine. So let's look at what a razor blade scores. So another question I've got is, how do you sharpen this tiny little bleeder for the Kudupoint Contour? This thing is incredibly small. Now it's neat in that it fits into their head in this slot. But it is tiny. There really isn't a very good way to sharpen it. At best, I think all you would want to do is to lay the flat side. Let me see if I've got something small. Here's a small diamond plate. Would be to lay the flat, it's even hard to grab, and simply sharpen the back side, lay it flat. I wouldn't bother sharpening the bevel side. I would sharpen the flat side, which will raise a burr on the beveled side, but this thing is just so incredibly small that I don't know if it pays to bother to sharpen it. But that's one way to do it, is to simply attack the back side by laying it flat and sharpening the back side of the bevel. But that is incredibly tiny. So the results bore out pretty well, that we had a great finish under the microscope, and we had a sharp head. As the result, the last task is to weigh it. We started out at 118 and we finished at 118. Sharpening, as I always say, does not remove that much material from the edge. Unless you've really nicked it up and hit a rock or something and you've got to really repair a lot, you're not taking a lot off. Lastly, on every head, I say lube up everything that's prone to rusting. Hornady One Shot, WD-40 corrosion inhibitor are two that I've tested that had the best results in long-term corrosion resistance. So certainly use something to stave off rust. You work too hard to get this sharp. So there we have it. That is the Kudupoint Contour.